Ready.
We're live. Hi, this is William Ramsey. Welcome to William Ramsey Investigates. On today's show, I have a very special guest, a returning guest. Her name is Caitlin Rother. I had her on my show back in 2021. We covered her excellent book, which I read. That book was Death on Ocean Boulevard, the Coronado Mansion case. And today's 2025, August, and she's put out a new book this year. The full title, if you're watching this on Rockfin, Rumble, or X, is Down to the Bone: A Missing Family's Murder and the Elusive Quest for Justice. And she is a New York Times best-selling author. We were talking in the show. I think she's had 15 books, and I think she's going to have 19 in the next year or so. She was an investigative reporter at daily newspapers for 19 years. Her work has been published in Cosmopolitan, the Los Angeles Times, the San Diego Union Tribune, the Chicago Tribune, the Washington Post, Boston Globe, and the Daily Beast. She's also a TV and radio crime commentator and has appeared on 250 shows, many of which air internationally, including 2020, People Magazine Investigates, Crime Watch Daily, Australia's World News, Nancy Grace Snapped, as well on Netflix, Investigation Discovery, Lifetime, HLN, Reels, Oxygen E, and A&E. She also works as a writing research coach and consultant. She enjoys ocean swimming and plays keyboards and sings in a band. And her website is her full name, Caitlin Rother. So it's CAITLINROTHER.com. And I'll put a link to both this most recent book, our old interview, and her website in the show notes. So welcome back to the show, Caitlin Rother.
Thank you. Thanks for having me back.
Excellent. So for people who hadn't heard our earlier show, maybe you can talk about your background. I know you've written a ton of books. You have books coming on the horizon that will be published soon. But then lead up to kind of the background and why you researched and wrote this particular book, Down to the Bone.
Okay, so if you listen to the last interview that we did, which I just did a week ago, I had a long time spending talking about myself. That when you asked that question, so I'm not gonna go over it all again because people can just listen to the last show. But I basically worked at newspapers for almost 20 years as an investigative reporter. My goal was to get a crime novel published. That's what I was really hoping to do, and so I worked on a book that was eventually published called Naked Addiction. And it's a crime mystery novel. But I couldn't get it published. So I ended up writing true crime because that's kind of what I was doing for a living. I was a investigative reporter, and I thought, well, I'll write nonfiction. And then I sold that book, and the first book did really well. But my passion was always kind of crime fiction, but I didn't really know what I was doing. So the fun thing is that fast forward all these years later, this book Down to the Bone that came out in June, we had some issues at the publisher. They delayed publication 3 times. So first of all, it needed to be legally vetted because it's a complicated case, which I wanted. But then there were some internal issues at the publisher, and it just kept getting delayed. So I was upset. And so what I did was I worked on my crime fiction. So I had that first book that was published. I couldn't get the second book published, which I was trying to do a series, but I just didn't really know what I was doing. So after all these years of doing true crime, 15 books, and the majority of them are true murder cases. I know how a detective thinks and what a detective does to investigate a murder case. I didn't know that at the time. I was kind of, I'd read a lot of fiction, Michael Connelly, Patricia Conwell, a bunch of thrillers, Harlan Coben, to get the pacing, the narrative structure. But I didn't know my material well enough. And so now I do. And so while I was waiting for this book to come out, I wrote, 2.5 novels.
Great, congrats.
So thanks. So that's what's coming out in January. It's the first one is called Hooked. And so Naked Addiction is actually the prequel to that. But so this whole time that I was working as a newspaper reporter, on Sundays, I used to write my fiction. And I was going to writing conferences, and I was going to writing workshops and improving my craft. And, for anybody out there who is really trying to get published, you got to know what you're doing. And you can keep rewriting the same thing over and over again. But if you don't know what you're writing about, if you don't have the knowledge and experience, it doesn't matter. So, there's a time, and I wish that I was having the success that I'm having now when I was much younger, so I had more energy. But the fact of the matter is, I can't change, time. And I just wasn't there yet. So now I am, and I feel like I'm getting a second chance at writing what I originally wanted to write, crime fiction. But Down to the Bone, because I had these issues with Down to the Bone, I guess it was an opportunity for me to use that downtime to get these books published. But let me take a sip of tea, and I'll come back to your question.
So you're working the whole time on fiction and nonfiction. So you've gone in between both. And you also have really great blurbs from well-known authors, Greg Olson, Catherine Ramsland, Michael Connolly, who you mentioned. So these people all,
I'm really grateful for that. And I've gotten some really nice blurbs for the book coming out in January too. So you asked about Down to the Bone. Well, okay. So the last time we talked was about Death on Ocean Boulevard. That book and this book, I kind of look at as part one and part two. So Death on Ocean Boulevard is part one and Down to the Bone is part two. And the reason I say that is because they both deal with allegations of confirmation bias. And they both have to deal with the same homicide unit at the same sheriff's department.
Wow, okay.
Yeah, so basically with Death on Ocean Boulevard, the allegations were that the detectives in the homicide unit basically decided that it was a suicide. Rebecca Zahow, who was allegedly found hanging naked, bound, and gagged. So her ankles were bound together, her hands were bound behind her back, and she had a blue t-shirt stuffed around her, tied around her neck and stuffed into her mouth. And she allegedly, jumped over, still tied up like that, jumped over this railing on a balcony, had, cut this rope to let her fall 9 feet and 2 inches without hitting the ground. Somehow she knew how to do that. I mean, there were just a lot of questions, and a lot of people who have read the book, and even people who haven't read the book, most people seem to think it's a murder. But the sheriff's department to this day still think that it's a suicide. So in this case, the allegations of confirmation bias and Down to the Bone, sheriff's department looked at this case, and I'll go back into detail about the story, but I just wanted to kind of preface with this. The first sheriff's department investigation was a missing persons investigation, and in San Diego County Sheriff's Department, they don't have a separate missing persons unit, so the homicide detectives work on that. So they said it was a missing persons case, and even though the first search warrant affidavit claims that there was foul play and they think it was a murder, apparently the judge said, next time I'm not seeing any evidence of for foul play and probable cause here. So I'm not going to let you come back for any more search warrants for any financial paperwork or anything and dig into anybody's life until you can prove that this is a murder. So for the next 3 years, it was a missing persons case, regardless of the fact that there were these, red flags. And then in the second investigation, once these people, they just mysteriously vanished from their house in February of 2010. And 3 years after, investigating as a missing person case, the detective who was leading the investigation said they went voluntarily to Mexico, so they weren't murdered.
There was a car found.
Well, let me just finish my little preface, and then we can go back into the details. So he dropped the case and said, I'm going to pass it on to the FBI, which he never apparently did, more than in name only. 9 months later, their bodies, skeletal remains actually, their bodies were kind of torn up and the tissue is obviously gone. So nearly 4 years later, their skeletal remains were found in the desert, and the next sheriff's department in San Bernardino County, in short order, basically settled on one defendant, one suspect, and within a year had arrested him And so the defense's whole case was confirmation bias. You looked at this guy who had the same motive as another business associate of Joseph McStay, and yet he was never even labeled as a suspect. So that was basically the case at trial. But we can go back into the details of the case if you want to ask me another question. But I just wanted to get that out of the way.
Right, but it is interesting, this overlap between these two crime scenes out in the area around San Diego. And
well, it's more an approach. It's more an approach that the sheriff's department is making. And I have a guy who, ran for sheriff. He was a commander, had been with the sheriff's department for a long time. And he basically just said it's because they want to just clear cases and they don't really, spend enough time really digging into them. And they just accept some premise at the beginning, and they just, regardless of the evidence that they find to the contrary, it's like they just ignore it, and that's what confirmation bias is. You get a piece of evidence or a theory or a premise, and no matter what you find after that, you won't move from your original premise because that's what you decided it was,
Right. No, it's interesting. I would think that these investigators and detectives should be very aware of confirmation bias and be avoiding it, like consciously avoiding.
Well, during the trial, the prosecution basically was mocking the defense and joking and laughing about confirmation bias because everything was confirmation bias, because that's what they keep saying. Well, yeah, that's because there was a lot of that in the case, so.
Right. So who were the McStays? I mean, this is it's like very graphic. This is very disturbing, but it's like a whole family.
Yeah, it's a family of 4, and I broke one of my own rules, and that is I don't like to write about the murder of kids. But because we don't know exactly what happened to this family, and that's one of the things that I thought was most curious, to this day, I personally do not know who killed this family. Because there are so many unanswered questions, and that's something that the prosecution could never answer for the jury. They don't know where they were killed or when they were killed or how they were killed necessarily, but they think that it was a 3-pound sledgehammer that was found in one of the 2 graves that they found these skeletal remains in, because there were round holes in the back of the skulls of each of the victims. So, but at the time, they vanished. It was a very bizarre story, and that's how I found out about it, because it's really unusual for a family of 4 to go missing. So, 1 kid or 2 kids even is pretty unusual, but 1 kid going missing is not that unusual. A teenager, a mother, 1 person at a time is not that unusual. But when it's a whole family, it's very unusual. So that's number 1. Number 2, the fact that they just seemed like they just vanished. So when the brother and the business associate, Chase Merritt, they were starting to wonder where they were because they weren't answering emails, they weren't answering phones. And so it was bizarre that they just, Chase Merritt had lunch with Joseph McStay on February 4th, and then nobody heard from them or talked to them after that. And so he and Michael McStay, the brother, came over before they officially reported them missing, and came into the house and saw eggs sitting out on the counter like they were going to cook them, fresh eggs. I don't think they were fresh anymore, but they were sitting out on the counter, and there was, coffee in the pot and 2 bowls of popcorn that the kids were probably snacking on, and there was fruit out on the counter that was rotting, and, there were diapers in the trash. The dogs were left outside in the backyard with no food and no water. I mean, basically, it just was a very odd situation. So even though the judge said there was no probable cause, it was clearly a bizarre situation where they just abruptly were either taken out of there or they left that place. So the question is why, right? And so there was no blood. Not a speck of blood. And so what is another example of this confirmation bias is the defense had one of these sheriff's detectives on the stand and said, so you're pretty convinced that this murder happened in the house, or at least started in the house? And the detective said yes. And the attorney said, even though there is no forensic evidence to back that up. And the detective said yes, which to me is pretty much tells you everything you need to know.
Right. No, it's very strange. So they just said that they were a disappearing person. Like that was it. And
Yeah.
then like they didn't make a crime scene or set it off or yellow tape or
Right.
do anything strange in that and then
Right. They didn't secure the scene because the detective said, well, I didn't want to scare them, and they didn't seem to think that there was anything wrong. And so, the next thing that happened that was pretty disruptive was the mom came over the next morning after they reported him missing on the 15th. The detectives came over, toured the house, saw the same egg sitting out, saw all that stuff. Mom came over, but there was not a search. Okay, this was just a reporting them missing. So they just walked through the house, and that was it. The mom came over the next morning and cleaned up the entire kitchen. So threw everything away that showed allegedly how they left the house so abruptly. And so they also had been painting in the kitchen, and there was a tray of paint and a roller still wet. Nobody had cleaned it. Well, it wasn't wet anymore, but it had been left when it was wet. So no one cleaned up. Nobody washed the roller. Nobody threw away the foil lining, which was supposed to be an easy way to just clean up that. The friend who was helping them paint showed Summer. So it's Joseph and Summer, the parents, Joey Jr. and Gianni, are the two little boys, 3 and 4 years old. And so this friend of theirs, MacArger, I hate saying his name because I always get it backwards. He was helping them paint, and so he was trying to reach them too, and he couldn't get a hold of them because he was coming back to paint. But he basically taught Summer that if you line the tray of the paint tray, it's a real easy way to clean up. And she didn't do that. So that's why he thought, this is really weird. They must have been interrupted somehow because they just left suddenly. So were they taken or did they leave suddenly? So they didn't know initially, but it was just a very weird scene.
Right. So nothing, no cell phones, no nothing, just...
They never found their cell phones, but they know they never used them again. They never used their credit cards again. They never accessed their bank accounts after that day.
Right. No, it's incredible.
Which is another reason why it doesn't look like, they voluntarily just went to Mexico because, well, what money were they using? How were they living if that was the case,
Right. Or flew to Hawaii or something. Like it was all just very strange.
Mm-hmm.
That it went on for that long as a missing persons case all the way to 2014. Like that's just off the charts. So 3-4 years.
It was 2013.
2013, excuse me. So the arrest took place in 2014. The arrest was in 2014,
right? Yeah.
And that's, so that he had kind of Michael McStay, Joseph McStay, who's the father.
Mm-hmm.
He had kind of a curious business line, right? He was a waterfall sculptor or something, right?
He made waterfalls kind of that hung on the wall, so for offices or whatever, So he had everything was sold online. So he had a website. So all the business went through this website. He had 2 business associates that he worked with, not partners, associates. And I want to be clear that that's what I'm calling them.
So they didn't have an ownership in his businesses, right? But he
not on paper, no. But there were 2 businesses. Let me just tell you this. So there's 2 business associates. One is Dan Kavanaugh, who designed the website, and the other one was Chase Merritt, who helped build the waterfalls. Okay, so those are the 2 people he mostly worked with. And he was moving toward expanding and doing more and more custom work to make bigger waterfalls, because when he started out, he was mostly just reselling other people's waterfalls, other manufacturers' waterfalls through this website, but he couldn't make that much money that way. So he could make more money, a bigger profit margin, if he designed them and made bigger ones himself with Chase Merritt and sold them that way. So that's what he was doing, which was leaving Dan Kavanaugh out of the deal because he was doing them separately and hiding those transactions from Dan Kavanaugh. But then Dan Kavanaugh found out.
Oh, I see.
And so he was upset and he threatened Joseph. He says, I'm going to shut the website down if you don't pay me off, because I'm the one who's responsible for making this business so successful because it's the website that really sells everything. So he was upset, and that was in writing. He sent him a series of messages, which, by the way, the investigators had, the prosecution had access to, but that never, they just didn't want to look at Dan Kavanaugh. They only wanted to look at Chase Merritt. So Chase Merritt is the one who was arrested eventually, and he's the one who is now on death row for these murders. And I don't take a position on whether I believe he's guilty or not. I just say, I still to this day do not know who killed these people because there were so many holes in the prosecution's case and conflicts with their timeline and the premise, the evidence, just conflicting evidence and information. It just didn't work for me,
Right. But Merritt, or Chase, his first name is Charles, but he went by Chase.
Right.
He had some sketchy things in his past leading up to the...
Well, so he was a con man, and he had, he had been in prison, but for theft or receiving stolen property, never anything violent. So one of the questions I have is, if you're going to kill a 3 and a 4-year-old child, doesn't it seem strange that you're 58 years old and you've never hurt anybody and suddenly you kill 2 little children? I mean, I just think that, murder is one thing, but killing children, I think is something, it's a different type of person.
Very dark.
Do you know what I mean?
Dark. Yes.
And so the prosecution says, well, he was stealing money from Joseph. He was, fraudulently printing out checks using this QuickBooks software. And Joseph found out and Joseph fired him. And so Chase Merritt came down after their lunch and killed the whole family and put them in his truck and drove away. Well, there's some issues with that. Number one, there's traffic and other things. It's clear that they did meet for lunch based on the cell phone records because you can see where Joseph's phone was. And the fact that he was calling him on the way. The phone was where Merritt said they were for an hour and a half in Rancho Cucamonga. And then Joseph started driving home and he was still calling Merritt. And he was still talking to him at 7:47 while he was trying to. That was the last call on his phone. At a time when the neighbor's surveillance camera across the street saw some white truck leaving the McStay's house. And the prosecution said that was Chase Merritt driving away from the house after killing them. And yet there's still somebody on Joseph's computer at 8:00 working on this CAD program on a pump that they were talking about all day long for a waterfall that they were working on. So if he's dead by 7:47, who's on his computer at 8:00 if Chase Merritt is driving away in the truck that was seen on this surveillance footage?
Right. How does that make sense?
Right there. Those are several conflicting pieces of evidence that the jury just apparently overlooked. I don't understand how that happened because, and then the other thing was they called a witness. The defense called a witness who had been the prosecution's witness, who had been hired for free, by the way. He was doing this for free. He was a scientist and he did measurements, and he said that he could not testify that was Merritt's truck on the surveillance video because in order for that to have been Merritt's truck, his wheels would have had to have been underground. And so the prosecution said, okay, never mind, we're not going to call you to testify. So they found someone else who said that it was Merritt's truck on the video. And then they had to call this guy as a defense witness to explain that he told the prosecution that it couldn't be Merritt's truck, and then they basically fired him. And so that doesn't look so good either for the prosecution. You know,
Oh,
why
no,
are
no.
you prosecuting somebody when someone's telling you that you're wrong, your premise is wrong, and they're like, well, we'll just find someone who says it's right.
Right. It's weird. They did have evidence on Merritt that his cell phone pinged in the area
Okay,
of
so that's a
Ramsey.
whole other area of debate, and Merritt is working on a habeas petition, and I believe that the cell phone debate is a major portion of that. So basically, this is kind of complicated, so I'll try to
Okay.
summarize. But during the defense's case, there was a cell phone expert who was supposed to testify that the cell phone tower at the gravesite on a hill was malfunctioning. And there are two antennae that were basically showing on these records which were faulty according to the expert. So the tower was faulty and therefore the records were wrong because they were saying that the phone was pinging in the opposite direction from where it really was. Number one. Number two, Merritt claims he was never there in the forest in the desert, and if he was there in the desert, he was visiting a family member. Now that I don't know if that's true or not, but the fact of the matter is, the defense attorney got the prosecution's cell phone expert. He wasn't really an expert; he was an FBI agent, but he was the guy that they called to explain these records, and they were using FBI records and other records that the defense did not have access to, which was a whole discovery issue that they had to, fix in the middle of the trial. But he admitted that you couldn't really use those records to pinpoint any location of a person and their phone because they were not based on GPS and they were not specific enough. And the way I learned a lot about cell phone tower technology, but you can have, your phone does not necessarily connect with the closest tower. If that tower is busy or if there's a connectivity issue, which there is in the desert, things bounce around a lot. Basically, the defense was saying you can't pinpoint, you can't say anybody was anywhere specifically at a certain time in the desert in this area because of all these connectivity and reception issues and cell tower issues. But the thing is that they never called the cell phone expert because the defense attorney felt like he got enough out of the prosecution expert to say that you couldn't pinpoint anybody's location using these records. And so Merritt to this day is still furious about that because he feels like if they had called the cell phone expert, and to explain that to the jury, and, to be honest, I don't know that it would have made a difference to this jury because they overlooked quite a few things. So.
Interesting. I mean, but it was kind of like a legal kind of odyssey too. It wasn't some kind of cut and
Yeah,
dry.
I mean, and one thing I didn't mention, the defense attorney who was supposed to call the cell expert got sick in the middle of the trial and disappeared for like 6 weeks because he said he was having some kind of neurological issue. He went to doctors. He said, I was just sitting in a room and my brain just wouldn't function. And I said, and I don't know that I could ever be work as an attorney again. And when he came back, he still wasn't 100%. So they had to delay the trial and calling witnesses because the other defense attorney, there are two defense attorneys working as a team, but they had split up the witnesses. And so the other attorney had not prepared to question the witnesses that the other attorney, the sick attorney, was supposed to question. So yeah, that delayed the trial. And then toward the end, they were starting to lose jurors because they had thought that this trial was only going to go on for like 3 or 4 months, and it ended up dragging on for almost 6 months.
Right. I mean, but I thought he switched lawyers too. Like,
oh well, he was constantly firing lawyers through the entire case. I mean, all the way through the sentencing hearing, he was still he was still trying to fire his lawyers at the sentencing hearing. So Chase Merritt was not an easy client.
he wasn't, but that's like a delaying tactic. That's a very
well. It could be, but I think he also was just so upset that he just wanted to get the guy. He thought he wasn't doing a good job. I interviewed Chase Merritt a bunch of times, so he's definitely has his ideas about how things should be.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Did you think he was a criminally minded person?
Well, he's been in prison. I mean, he has committed crimes, but he has never been convicted until now of a violent crime.
A violent crime, right.
And so, like I said, there's a hierarchy when you're in prison, and the people who are thieves do not see themselves as serious criminals as compared to murderers. They do not see themselves and do not put themselves in the same class. Do you know what I'm saying? It's like a whole different thing. And children killers are like a whole other thing entirely, you know?
Right. You're on par with
child killers, I should say.
Pedophile or whatever. Like,
right. Well, not pedophile because that's sex, but I just mean,
I'm just saying
anything involving kids, you know. I mean, look what's going on with our government right now, our federal government, all this hoopla going on about Jeffrey Epstein and the president. You know, it's causing all kinds of commotion because it involves children, you know.
Yep.
Anyway.
Yeah, so it's just this is not a cut and dried case. Is that really?
No, it is different from any book that I've written to this point. And the other thing that was different, I had written a whole book, like 90,000 words. I've been trying to get these discovery materials. So the good thing about these two last books of mine is I had sources who gave me discovery materials, which is not an easy thing to do because you cannot get them through a public records request. You have to have somebody who is a party to the case trust you enough to give you these materials. And so that means I had access to the investigative files from both sheriff's departments. And that is not something that the sheriff's department would have ever given me. So, and I got it legally, but my point is they're not public records. And so I was able to have access to what the investigative report said and witness interviews. And so, you know, many of these things did not get to the courtroom, so the jury would not have had access to these either. But I had a lot of background information that did not necessarily come to trial because in some cases, you know, the defense tried to get a bunch of evidence into the case and the judge said no. So for example, they tried to do a third-party culpability case, which is where they tried to blame somebody else. And they were trying to do a third-party culpability case blaming Dan Kavanaugh. And the judge said no. You know, I don't see any evidence directly relating him to the murders. So you can't do that. So what they did was he did allow them to present financial information regarding Kavanaugh. And so their case was basically that Kavanaugh had the same, if not more of the same financial motive that Merritt did. And they presented a lot of information about how Dan Kavanaugh took over Joseph McStay's business and took in $206,000 within a 10-month period, and only $59,000 of that went toward making fountains, versus what the prosecution claimed Merritt stole from Joseph's business, which was $20,000 in checks that they accuse him of forging, printing out through the QuickBooks software and cashing. Although that $20,000 included money that he paid another vendor, so it wasn't even the full 20. So if you compare numbers alone, Kavanaugh ended up with 10 times the amount, and that's very loose because it's not a comparable period or anything. But I'm just saying that's what the takeaway was. You know, that Kavanaugh had way more money, and then he sold the business as well, without any authorization and without paying the McStay family any of the money that he made when he sold the business.
Wow. How much did he sell it for? Do you know?
I do. I don't remember all the details. Okay. All I know is, I think it was like, I don't want to get this wrong because my memory is not great on these details after I've been working on all these novels and I get all these other details in my short-term memory. I think it was $20,000.
So it wasn't that much. It wasn't a huge number.
Well, but he'd already taken in all this other money and now it was in total debt. And he had lawsuits pending because he hadn't produced hadn't produced the waterfalls that he'd been paid for, stuff
Oh,
like that.
wow. Well, I didn't know that either.
Yeah. And so I asked the prosecution and the investigators, why wasn't Kavanaugh? Because the defense spent the entire trial accusing Kavanaugh of, quote unquote, stealing Joseph McStay's money. And this was in court, so this is in public. You have to be really careful what you say so you don't get, so people can't sue you. But this was an accusation made in court. And I was basically told that even if they were able to show or prove that Kavanaugh stole money, there's no victim, so they can't prosecute at this point because Joseph is dead.
Right.
So that may answer some people's questions that they had about that.
It's just a horrible story. And it's very strange, too, because I've done a lot of true crime cases, but usually if there's multiple victims, there's multiple perpetrators. And
so this is something that we can talk about.
Speculation on my part, yeah.
Well, no, but in this case, that's what they said. They said, okay, there were 2 shallow graves that these skeletal remains were found in, about 20 feet apart from each other, and each one of them had a set of tire tracks where it looks like the trucks backed up and dumped these bodies into these graves, right? These shallow graves, and the tire. The diameter of the wheelbase was different on each of the trucks, which looks like 2 trucks were involved. So, and neither one of them, by the way, matched Chase Merritt's truck.
Wow.
Yeah. And there was DNA found at the gravesite. According to the defense, they got some pieces of like ties that were bound around Joseph's body. He was wrapped in some kind of burlap kind of material. They tested some of these ties, and they found 3 DNA profiles, 2 men and 1 woman, and none of them matched the McStay family, and none of them matched Chase Merritt.
Wow.
So there's just a lot of evidence in this case that, like I said, raises questions about
So Merritt is at San Quentin, is that right? Is he in San Quentin?
He was at San Quentin, but we no longer have a death row at San Quentin, so they basically moved everybody who was on death row to another prison. So he is now actually near me at Richard J. Donovan prison.
Wow. And so he's appealing, obviously. He's doing the habeas corpus petition.
Well, habeas corpus is separate from the appeal, but yes.
Yeah. I think it's a motion in equity, if I remember, something like that. Wow. This is a very strange case. I mean, there's no evidence at the house. That's what's also weird, is that nothing's moved.
Exactly.
So, like, they disappear, then people show up, and they don't find anything.
Right.
Blood spatter, just something.
Exactly. Not even a drop.
Yeah. No,
and they never found a drop of blood in Chase Merritt's truck that he supposedly moved the bodies in, or any of his clothing, or any of his belongings. They never found any blood. And they looked for it, too. He had sold his truck. They managed to track it down, and they sprayed, Blue Star, and no blood.
Right. Yeah, this is an unnerving case. Very strange, but we are at the 40-minute mark. I mean, where can people find the Amazon book? It's on Amazon, right down to the bone.
It is available anywhere that you want to buy a book. So just because a bookstore doesn't have it, you can order it. You can go to Barnes and Noble; they'll have it, or they'll order it for you because it's in their computer. In any independent bookstore you go to, you can order it. Or you can buy it on Amazon if you'd like. If you want a signed copy and you don't live in San Diego, you're welcome to email me and we can arrange that.
Great. There's Kindle, audiobook, audio CD, and hardcover, so you can get it in multiple formats. Yeah.
And sometimes people wait for the paperback. I don't know that there's any guarantee these days that hardcovers, necessarily go to paperback. So if you're waiting, you may not get a paperback. I don't know. But that's, the publishing world has changed a lot. And people say, well, I don't want to buy a hardcover because it's expensive. I'll wait for the paperback. Well, you may not be able to get one because I haven't been told that they're necessarily going to do that.
Do that. Wow. Wow.
I don't know. I mean, they haven't told me they're not, but I'm just saying don't count on it.
Right. And then your new books, let's see if I can pull up your website. Your new book is on its way.
Yeah, I had another book that came out, if we could just talk about that briefly, because
Sure.
there was another book in between the last one you and I talked about and this one. It's called Body Parts. And it originally came out in 2009, but I've updated it with 32 new pages, 110,000 new words about the genetic genealogy identification of Wayne Adam Ford, serial killer Wayne Adam Ford. His first victim he dismembered, and for 25 years they didn't know who she was, and she's finally been identified as Carrie Ann Cummings because they were able to use genetic genealogy to match her DNA to her cousin's in GED Match, that website that gives permission to law enforcement to use DNA to solve crimes. And so that's what this update is all about. We reissued the book because now we know who she is and her family has closure.
Wow, so he was a long haul trucker picking up people or
right
something. Wow.
Right. And then yes, I have a series of thrillers coming out starting in January. The first one is called Hooked, and the second one is called Staged, and I'm just about to turn in you just passed it.
Oh, sorry.
It's up.
Stage. There's Hooked.
There it is.
For Staged. Okay.
Staged is not. We don't have a cover yet.
Okay.
So basically, I'll just quickly tell you. This is about a detective, a surfing detective named Ken Good, and it's set in La Jolla, where I grew up, and my mom and stepdad still live. It's a beautiful beach called Wind and Sea. That's his home away from home where he goes surfing. And there's an investigative reporter, female character named Katrina Chopin, and they basically, reporters and detectives don't necessarily get along. They're kind of at odds and in conflict, and they're not supposed to share information, and they're both trying to solve a case, but they have access to different information. So, like, the reporter goes and interviews people that may not want to talk to the police, and the police, interview people who won't necessarily talk to reporters, and they have, other kinds of legal powers to get access to information that reporters can't get. And so it's kind of a conflict between the two, right? So that's generally how it goes. And, I've had great rapport with certain detectives who share information, but that's usually when it's at the trial stage, when they've already solved it and it's okay for them to talk about it. But, in this case, there's also a romantic attraction between these two characters, and they meet at a bar, and Ken Good does not realize that this beautiful woman is a reporter. So the next day, after he's been called out to deal with these two suspicious deaths in an exclusive neighborhood called La Jolla Farms, and this, a lot of this is true. So it's set in La Jolla, and I have a lot of places that are real in the book, and there's a lot of information in these books that I'm pulling from my own experience when I was a reporter. And it's my town, it's La Jolla. So it's been really fun. It's just been so great to really.
It's a beautiful city. It's amazing if you get a chance.
Yeah, it's a, and the first book starts, the cover is this wave because he's a surfer, so right. I love the cover.
I've stayed at the La Jolla Beach and Tennis Club. It's very nice.
Well, and then there's La Jolla Beach and Tennis Club is also in the book. So
nice.
Oh, it's funny that you say that.
Yeah, well, I know that area. I was actually just down there this year. So anyway, people check out these two new books. The one is down.
They're available for Hooked is available for pre-order right now. So
great.
Yeah,
check it out. I will put links to this. I'll put links to your website. People can reach out to you at the website. It's Caitlin Rother, full name.
.com.
.com. And then we talk about Down to the Bone, of Missing Families Murder and the Elusive Quest for Justice. So, and also the earlier book we did was Death on Ocean Boulevard. Great book. Another strange story too. Wow.
And Body Parts.
And Body, yeah. Thanks so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me back. I appreciate it.
All
I'll
right,
talk
stay
to you
there.
again.
All right, stay there.
All right. Bye-bye.
Stay there.